June 6, 1944. Every eye in the world is on Normandy. The largest seaborne invasion in history has just crashed onto the beaches of northern France, and the German High Command is scrambling west. Maps are being redrawn, reserves are being argued over. Hitler's generals are staring at France, counting Allied divisions, calculating distances from the coast to the Rhine. And in that moment of total distraction, something extraordinary is happening in the forests of Belarus. Something the Germans cannot see, because they have been carefully, methodically, and brilliantly taught not to look. 2.4 million Soviet troops are disappearing into the tree line. They move only at night. Their vehicles are hidden before dawn. Soviet staff officers fly over their own positions during daylight hours specifically to check that nothing is visible from the air. Civilian populations near the front are quietly relocated, and across the entire sector there is radio silence, complete, total, enforced silence. No transmissions, no signals, nothing that German intelligence could intercept and read. At German headquarters, the assessment is calm. Army Group Center has held its positions for over a year. The terrain in Belarus, forests, marshes, rivers, is considered a natural barrier against large armored operations. The intelligence picture shows all 5 Soviet tank armies concentrated far to the south, in Ukraine. The expected offensive, the expected threat, the expected blow, all of it points south, toward Romania, toward the Balkans, toward the oil fields the Reich cannot survive without. The Belarusian front is labeled stable. Within 5 weeks, Army Group Center, 800,000 men, will essentially cease to exist. To understand how that happens, you have to understand the lie that made it possible. And to understand the lie, you have to understand the man who helped design the trap it was hiding. By the summer of 1944, the Eastern Front stretched nearly 2,000 miles from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. The story of the previous 2 years had been a grinding Soviet resurgence. Stalingrad, Kursk, the liberation of Kiev, the retaking of the Crimea. Army Group South had been shattered. Army Group North had been pushed back and was barely holding. But in the center, a massive German salient, what analysts called the Belarusian balcony, still bulged eastward, anchored to 4 fortified cities: Vitebsk in the north, Orsha in the center, Mogilev to the south, and Bobruisk at the base. Hitler had issued his Festungen order, fortress cities, to be held to the last man. No tactical withdrawal permitted. The logic was psychological as much as military. These cities were to become pillars of the line, absorbing Soviet pressure and denying the Red Army the open ground it needed to maneuver. What Hitler did not fully account for was what those orders would mean when the line broke anyway. The garrison commanders would be locked in place. They could not fall back. They could not regroup. The fortresses would not anchor the defense. They would become graves. Army Group Center's armored strength was dangerously thin. Only 553 tanks and assault guns for the entire Army Group. There were almost no mobile reserves to respond to a breakthrough. The one formation that could theoretically plug a gap, the 20th Panzer Division, was positioned near Bobruisk in the south. One division, for an 800-kilometer front. Stavka, the Soviet High Command, had begun planning in earnest by late April 1944. Marshals Georgy Zhukov and Alexander Vasilevsky were assigned to coordinate the offensive at the highest level. 4 fronts would attack simultaneously, north to south, overwhelming German command response across the entire sector at once. The operational concept was encirclement, not a single thrust, but a sequence of simultaneous blows designed to collapse the flanks, surround the fortress cities, and then drive west toward Minsk before the German Fourth Army, still fighting in the center, could escape. The commander of the Southern Axis, the First Belarusian Front, was Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky. His role would prove decisive. But before the offensive even began, Rokossovsky's most important battle happened not on a map, but in a room in Moscow. Rokossovsky's plan for his sector called for a double envelopment around Bobruisk, two simultaneous breakthrough points, striking from the north and south simultaneously, designed to encircle the German 9th Army before it could react. Stalin disagreed. Soviet doctrine favored a single concentrated blow. Rokossovsky was sent out of the room 3 separate times and told to reconsider. 3 times he came back with the same answer: 2 breakthroughs. Stalin eventually approved the plan. It was the exact decision that would seal Bobruisk's fate. But none of it would matter if the Germans knew it was coming. The German intelligence picture in the spring of 1944 was not simply wrong. It was logically constructed from the wrong foundation. The Soviets had pushed aggressively through Ukraine. All 5 Soviet tank armies were visibly concentrated there. German aerial reconnaissance, already degraded by Soviet air superiority, confirmed what the analysts expected to see. The pattern of the previous year pointed south. The Belarusian terrain pointed against a major offensive. And Army Group Center's own record, including successfully stopping a major Soviet operation in 1942, suggested the sector could hold. What the Germans could not know was that this was exactly the picture the Soviets had designed. The Maskirovka, Soviet operational deception, was not a single clever trick. It was a layered system, running simultaneously at every level of the military structure. At the strategic level, the tank armies in Ukraine were left exactly where they were, visible and legible, precisely because they were supposed to be seen. False radio traffic was generated in the south to simulate continued buildups. At the operational level, all communications relating to the Belarusian offensive were banned from radio entirely. At the tactical level, the movement of nearly 1.5 million combat troops into attack positions happened exclusively at night, with vehicles concealed under camouflage before first light, and Soviet officers checking from the air that nothing gave the buildup away. The result was one of the most complete intelligence failures of the Second World War. The Germans were looking exactly where the Soviets needed them to look. Behind the visible south, in the forests and marshes of Belarus, 36,400 artillery pieces, 5,200 tanks, and 5,300 aircraft were waiting in silence. There was one German general who sensed the danger. General Hans Jordan, commanding the 9th Army facing Rokossovsky's front, had been arguing for weeks that a major attack was imminent. He requested permission for tactical withdrawal, for repositioning, for anything that would give his army room to maneuver if the line broke. Field Marshal Ernst Busch, commanding Army Group Center, dismissed his concerns. The orders were clear: hold the line, hold the fortresses, hold everything. Jordan's warnings were correct. His chain of command would not let him act on them. That gap between the man who could see and the system that refused to respond would prove catastrophic. On the nights of June 19th and 20th, before the Soviet armies moved a single meter forward, thousands of Soviet partisan fighters behind German lines struck simultaneously at the rail network feeding Army Group Center. Over 10,000 individual rail targets were attacked in a coordinated wave. Tracks were cut, bridges were blown, switching stations were destroyed. Before the offensive had even begun, the German logistics network behind the front was severed. Ammunition could not move forward. Fuel could not reach the panzer units. Reinforcements, if they came, would arrive too late. The battle was not yet started. The supply line was already dead. In the early hours of June 22nd and 23rd, 1944, exactly 3 years after Operation Barbarossa had opened, the artillery began. 4 Soviet fronts attacked in sequence, north to south, in waves that denied the German command any chance to identify the main effort and redirect reserves. In the far north, General Bagramian's First Baltic Front opened what appeared to be a reconnaissance operation. The initial gains were so rapid, 16 kilometers by nightfall on the first day, across a 50-kilometer wide front, that Bagramians simply kept attacking instead of stopping to consolidate. The German northern flank was caving before headquarters had processed that the offensive was real. Chernyakovsky's 3rd Belarusian front struck next, driving 10 to 11 kilometers on the first day. Artillery was used on a scale that German defensive belts had not been designed to absorb. Around Vitebsk, Soviet forces began curving in from the north and south, starting to surround the garrison that Hitler's order had frozen in place. In the center, Zakharov's 2nd Belarusian front fixed the German 4th Army, pinned it, occupied it, denied it the ability to look left or right. And in the south, Rokossovsky's double-pronged strike began. The northern prong drove through the German line above Bobruisk. The 134th Infantry Division collapsed under the pressure. But the true tactical surprise came from the south. General Batov's 65th Army had identified a section of terrain that German defensive planning had labeled as impassable swamp. It was marked on German maps with a symbol meaning, "No advance is possible here." Soviet combat engineers worked through the night, laying corduroy log roads through the wetland. The 65th Army crossed the swamp before dawn and punched 6 miles into the German position on the first day. The 20th Panzer Division, the only real mobile reserve army group center possessed, was ordered south to contain Batov's breakthrough. In doing so, it left the northern sector of the Bobruisk pocket undefended. The two Soviet pincers were now driving toward each other. By June 27th, they met west of the city. German 35th Corps and 31st Panzer Corps, up to 70,000 men, were encircled east of Bobruisk under constant aerial bombardment. The fortress city that was supposed to anchor the line had become a sealed pocket. Vitebsk had already fallen. Orsha fell. Mogilev fell. One by one, the Festungen cities that were supposed to make the line unbreakable were surrounded and eliminated. Not because Soviet forces broke through them, but because Soviet armor bypassed them entirely. The garrisons fought in place, exactly as Hitler had ordered. The open ground behind them was already gone. The path to Minsk was open. From June 28th onward, the 5th Guards Tank Army and multiple cavalry mechanized groups drove west at full speed, crossing the Berezina River, the same river where Napoleon's retreating army had been shattered in 1812, and curving northwest toward Minsk. The German 4th Army, still engaged in the center, suddenly found Soviet armor appearing behind its western flank. It was not being pushed back. It was being enclosed. On July 4th, Minsk fell. Approximately 100,000 German soldiers, the bulk of what remained of the 4th Army, were now encircled east of the Belarusian capital. They attempted breakouts repeatedly between July 5th and July 12th. Most were destroyed. The remainder surrendered. Field Marshal Busch was dismissed and replaced by Field Marshal Model. But Model arrived to find there was almost nothing left to command. 28 German divisions had been completely destroyed. 50 more had been reduced to roughly half strength. The front that Germany had considered its most stable had simply ceased to exist. On July 17, 1944, just 6 weeks after D-Day, while Allied forces were still grinding through the Norman hedgerows, 57,000 German prisoners were marched through the streets of Moscow. Generals walked with their men. Water trucks followed behind the column, symbolically cleaning the streets after them. It was not merely a display of victory. It was a deliberate message about which front was actually deciding the war. By the end of August, Soviet lines had advanced between 350 and 600 kilometers to the west. Army Group North, its land connection to the rest of the German line now severed, was effectively isolated. Soviet forces reached the outskirts of Warsaw and established bridgeheads across the Vistula. Germany was fighting on two major fronts simultaneously for the first time since the war had begun. The total cost to the Wehrmacht in killed, wounded, and captured runs between 350,000 and 670,000 men. Historians debate the precise figure, as German records from this period are incomplete. What is not debated is the scale. By any measure, Operation Bagration was the single largest German military defeat of the entire war. Larger than Stalingrad, larger than anything the Western Allies would inflict in the same period. Yet in Western historical memory, the summer of 1944 belongs almost entirely to Normandy. At the time of D-Day, Germany had approximately 85 divisions facing the Western Allies in France. On the Eastern Front, it retained over 235. The armies that Zhukov, Vasilevsky, and Rokossovsky shattered in 6 weeks outnumbered everything the Wehrmacht had committed to stopping Eisenhower. The historical imbalance is real, and it reflects something honest about which narrative reached the archives that shaped the post-war story. The Soviet military itself drew a different lesson. Bagration became the model used to teach strategic deception for decades afterward. Studied, replicated, refined. The Maskirovka of the summer of 1944 was considered the highest expression of the principle. Make the enemy certain about the wrong thing, and the right thing becomes unstoppable. That certainty was not accidental. It was constructed, layer by layer, over months. The tank armies left visible in Ukraine, the radio silence in Belarus, the partisan attacks on the rails, Rokossovsky's engineers crossing a swamp that no one believed could be crossed, the double envelopment that Stalin had rejected 3 times and then approved. Each piece fit precisely because the commanders who built it understood not just where the enemy was, but what the enemy believed, and what it would take to keep that belief in place until the moment it became fatal. The lie did not erase Army Group Center on its own. The lie created the silence inside which everything else moved into position. By the time the truth became visible, the pocket was already closing.